Welcome to Plodcast episode 89. Plodcast episode 89. If you've not noticed, that's just one shy of 90. I mean, so the next time it's going to be 90. I want to talk a little bit about woke evangelicals. Woke evangelicals. That phrase "woke" has come into common currency in recent years, describing people who have had the lights come on, who have come to the realization that all was not as it had appeared to them growing up. Woke evangelicals are people who have all of a sudden been sensitized to the plight of blacks in America, or sensitized to the plight of sexual minorities in America, LGBTQ plus types. Being woke means being sensitized to all the grief that women have to put up with, et cetera. So, woke evangelical, and it's very easy for woke evangelicals to say, well, this is just golden rule stuff, or this is basic Bible stuff. We need to be nice. We need to be nicer, and we need to be nice, having come to our senses, having seen or becoming woke to the consequences of slavery in America, or the consequences of all the years of Jim Crow and so on. Now, on one level, every Christian who's got a sense of decency at all has to applaud the idea, at least the idea in the abstract, of reconciling groups that are hostile to each other, or removing tensions between groups that are in tension, or solving problems that are experienced as problems by people on both sides of a divide. My complaint against woke evangelicalism is that by abandoning discussion of Christ and his cross when it comes to these things, is that we are abandoning any hope of actually accomplishing a reconciliation. So in Colossians, the Apostle Paul tells us that in Christ we see the eradication of distinctions between barbarian and Scythian and slave and free and Jew and Greek. You have the same thing in Galatians, where he is, and these are groups that have all sorts of reasons to be suspicious of each other, to be hostile to one another, and so on. When people point to slavery, in American slavery, chattel slavery, which ended about a century and a half ago, and it's still a hot political issue now, such that some of our current candidates for the Democratic nomination are talking about reparations, so that we ought to put together a package or a proposal for reparations to pay blacks for the legacy of slavery. The problem with this is it's not that white America is too chintzy to come up with money that would actually solve the racial tension between blacks and whites in America. The reason for being suspicious, if someone came to me, if the Archangel Gabriel came down and said, hey, here's a great plan. If you get your congressman to introduce this plan in Congress, and if it passes, there's a guaranteed word from heaven that for $10 billion, you can eliminate racial animosity in the United States. The problems, the difficulties between whites and blacks for $10 billion will be gone. Now, I think that would be a tempting offer. Man, if someone said, no, $10 billion, I mean, that's talking about real money there, and I'd rather keep things as they are. I'd rather the hostility continue because I love my money. Oh, well, it's easy to see how that would be a hard-hearted, flint-hearted individual, talking that way, thinking that way, reacting that way. So my problem, the reason I'm reluctant to go down the reparations road is, well, let me put it this way. I'm not reluctant to go down that road. I'm opposed to going down that road. The reason I'm opposed to going down that road is not because I'm not willing to pay the money that it would take to get whites and blacks on a good footing. The problem is, the reason I'm opposed is I'm absolutely convinced that a reparations movement, is going to make race relations far, far worse. We're going to be like that woman in the Gospels who spent all her money on doctors, and the more she spent her money, the more her problem was not solved. So basically, if you've got people who are extracting money from a population, and the problem that they're using or pointing to in order to extract that money does not go away, then that tells you that the problem is not a problem that they're solving. That problem is the farm where they grow their money. So what would happen? What would happen if you had a reparations industry and you had all kinds of people who were now dependent on the flow of money, and the Archangel Gabriel showed up magically in a room and said, here's the easy button, here's the button, just somebody push it, and all the racial animosity will disappear for free. Won't even cost $10 billion. There'd be all kinds of people who'd be opposed to pushing that button. Because if you have a war on racism going, and there are numerous payouts that are happening because of that war on racism, what would happen if we eradicated racism? Well, what happens is just in the same way that when you have a war on poverty, you're creating a livelihood for a bunch of people who are conducting the war on poverty. And so what you need is more poverty so they can have something to conduct a war on. So basically, the difficulty with the woke approach is that I believe that the policy proposals, the things that people want to do in order to achieve this state of universal harmony, are a bad idea and will result in the opposite happening. So when I oppose woke evangelicals, it's not that I'm opposing universal harmony. It's I don't want to introduce misguided proposals that in the name of making everything better will actually make everything worse. So my book review for Plodcast episode 89 is a book by a couple of guys, Heath and Potter, and it's called Nation of Rebels. Nation of Rebels. Now, this is one of those books that I think, I'm not sure, but I think that these guys would be men of the left. They are indebted to the political thinker Thomas Franks, who's written some books that I've really profited by. He's also decidedly on the left. But Franks wrote a couple of books. Commodify Your Dissent is one of them. Another book was The Conquest of Cool. And this book is running in the same vein. It's running in the same vein. It's called Nation of Rebels. And basically, their analysis is very insightful and shows that the idea of counterculture in America is an illusion. So we like to think that there you've got mainstream establishment types, Chamber of Commerce types, Chamber of Commerce types. We'll just call them that. And then you've got the alternative counterculture hipster type. And what Heath and Potter are engaged in showing, is that in America, the counterculture is the culture. The counterculture is the mainstream. It's not a side tributary. It's not It's not a little thing off in the backwoods. It's not a little trickle stream. The counterculture is the mainstream. And what happened, and it's really an ironic thing, because what has happened is back in the you might say back in the days when the pre-hippie days, when you were dealing with the beat poets or the bohemians, those sorts of people, and it was just a handful of people that would, frequently get arrested, or they would they're really off the beaten track. Someone could make an argument that was a counterculture, and there is a pretense of maintaining that kind of counterculture, if you've ever seen Adbusters magazine, they're all about not being like the slick marketers of corporate America. But that's just a difference in the product. I mean, and this book begins with pointing out the anomaly of Adbusters selling a pair of sneakers, marketing their own sneakers. And that's part of how this whole scam works. In America today, there is no genuine counterculture. I would like to see the Christian church become that genuine counterculture, but I think we're too implicated in the whole system as it is. I don't think we've distinguished ourselves enough. I don't think we've separated ourselves out enough. If you like trenchant cultural analysis, those books I mentioned by Thomas Franks, Commodify Your Dissent, and Conquest of Cool, and this book, Nation of Rebels, shows very clearly that we are not we're not marching to a different drummer at all. And the people, the being a hipster is mainstream. Being one of the cool kids is mainstream. And of course, that destroys utterly the whole idea of being cool. Plodcast, episode 89 continues, and we come now to the Martyology section. So the servant of God must not be a striver, the Bible tells us, and yet he must correct the obstinate and the proud. Paul tells Timothy that he must be prepared to meekly instruct those who oppose themselves. That's what we're going to be looking at today. In 2 Timothy 2:25, he has to meekly instruct those who oppose themselves. And the word here is Antidiatithemai, and it describes those who set themselves up in opposition. This is not because they've carefully heard the words of the gospel and have found them wanting. Rather, it's because they hate the very aroma that proceeds from these words, even before they're spoken. This native opposition is hard to overcome. But Paul says that it is sometimes overcome by means of meek and patient instruction. So when someone comes into a unevangelized area, or you're preaching the gospel to a group of people, and you first present the gospel, there will be people there who volunteer for the position of generaling or leading the opposition. They set themselves up in opposition, and this is just the way it goes. This is the way people are.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.